Hi, and welcome to Random Fandom FC, the podcast where each week I meet a new fan and explore how they came to support their team, what's been their highest high, their lowest low, and anything else I should know. We look ahead to their next game and get a prediction, and then next week we'll check in to see if we were a blessing or a curse to the teams that we follow. My name's Rob, an Arsenal fan living in the States, and I'll be your host. Okay, before we meet this week's fan, we need to check in and see how last week's team got on. We were following Shrewsbury Town, and Dan was the fan, and he actually went to the game. It was away at Reading midweek. It was a respectable 1-1 draw, another point on the board for survival for Shrewsbury. And Dan sent me in a match report, so here we go. Summary, respect the point. An oddly off-colour Reading performance. At times they kept appearing to randomly kick the ball out. They were arguably there for the taking, but in the cold light of day, you take an away point at places like that. Shrewsbury were more fluid, decent enough on the ball, but just couldn't make it work in the final third. John Marquis missed his third penalty in little more than a month, which hardly helped the case. But midfielder Taylor Perry scored his second goal in 4 games, and that was enough to cancel out the first half strike from Reading. So really they go home with a point in their pocket, which goes on Dan's spreadsheet. He also called out there was an impressive performance from Abigail Byrne, England's most prominent female referee, said she was rock solid throughout and definitely wants to keep an eye on for the future. Well, I'm going to take that as we were not a curse because Shrewsbury didn't lose, so that's going to go down in the column that means that Random Fandom were a positive impact on this one. Okay, so that was the Shrewsbury Town match review. Let's crack on and see who we've got on Random Fandom this week. So, as the fans are chanting, who are you and who do you support?
I'm Laurie Shotton and I support Crystal Palace.
Now, last week I went and spoke to Dan, so somebody I'd never met before, and we talked about Shrewsbury Town. Now I'm reverting to form, and it's fair to say that we do know each other, Laurie. We go back a couple of years, maybe?
Yeah, quite a long time, yeah.
And as I found out with a couple of the other friends that have come on who I've known for years, I don't really know their backstory as to kind of why. I know you're a Palace fan, but quite how, I don't know. So when did it all begin? When was Palace the way forward for you?
Being honest, it was actually a later start than most with football because my family, my father and mother weren't really into football. So I had to find my own way. And back in the old days when we actually could watch football on the regular television and you just switched on and watched it on a Saturday, I started supporting Liverpool of all teams to start off with, and then moved on to Everton in the days of Trevor Steven and Gary Stevens and all players like that. And then my first game I got taken to was in 1989. I looked it up. April the 15th, 1989. CPFC versus Portsmouth. Ooh. In the old League Two, as it was at the time, because League One was the Premiership, and Palace came out 2-0 on top with Ian Wright, and I think Mark Bright might have got the second one. I know you're like that for your Arsenal days, and then that went from there. So after that, we got up into the top flight, and the ups and downs comes from that point. To be honest.
I was going to say, when I was just having a quick look at this, Crystal Palace have had their fair share of ups and downs. But just before we kind of move into that, 1989, Righty and Brighty. I mean, and I am going to sound like an old fart now, but I do miss the days of 4-4-2 when you had classic strike partnerships because you had Righty and Brighty, Shearer and Sheringham, or Shearer and Sutton, or York and Cole, Bergkamp and Henry. It was. We don't do it anymore now because everyone plays 4-3-3, so it's one striker and 2 wingers. But there was something special about 2 strikers, I think. What do you think?
I think, as well, a proper striker. If you look at most clubs now, take Arsenal. I know you've just lost Havertz, but you don't actually have that real striker. The one that just caused you a nuisance for 90 minutes, getting in your face and and doing that. We've actually got one now in Mateta, but very few teams have that. It's all these kind of floating forwards that just float all over the place and create things and have to be involved, but they're not just bang it in the back of the net kind of players anymore.
No, the only one that probably is Haaland, and then he gets criticised for, well, he doesn't really do much, does he? He has about 3 touches of the ball. I'm like, if you have 3 touches and 2 of them are goals, I mean,
Doesn't matter.
he's an old school striker. He really is. He
Yeah.
reminds me of Batistuta, the way he kind of. Anyway, we're not here to talk about other strikers. Let's get back to Palace. So I was having a look at this. Like you say, not long after supporting them, they came up. You've been up and down, so you've experienced both sides. Um, if we'll start on the low before we move back towards the high. What's been kind of the lowest low of your Palace journey?
Well, we've been bankrupt twice. Simon Jordan took over and saved us in 2000 when we were in real dire trouble, and but he didn't have enough money. So he took over from a guy called Goldberg, who bought it from Ron Nodes, and it got the club in so much trouble because he didn't actually buy the club. He didn't buy the ground. He didn't buy the training ground. He bought the name and the players. So actually, we got into real financial trouble from the word go in the way he bought the club. And then Jordan managed to buy the club and but didn't own the stadium. And it was only until so he got then, after 10 years of trying to get us up the leagues and everything, and again not having enough money to do it, we went bust in 2010, and we were very, very close to non-existence in 2010. That was probably the real low, and it was only down to a few local businessmen who had a bit of money. One of them owned Admiral Insurance or something like that, saved the club at that point. And when you think your club is going to go out of existence, and that's pretty low. I mean, I don't think many teams have been through that to that degree. Minutes away from Lloyd's closing us for good. So
yeah, I mean that resonates with something. So Dan, who was on last week talking about Shrewsbury, was on about when they got relegated out of the top 4 professional leagues down into the old conference, and he's like, not only do you not know will we ever come back and be in the professional divisions again, but will that be it? Will we just not be able to make enough money and just go out of business? So okay, no, that counts as I'll take that as your lowest low. I mean, to be fair, kind of. Oh, I don't want to do the pun and talk about eagles soaring, but you've done. You've come back amazingly, kind of from those days of like almost non-existence to. Would you went down and you came back up in. When you've been in the Premier League since what? Is it nearly a decade now? On a run.
well, I'll ask you this question, Rob. How many teams do you think have been in the Premier League consistently for now longer than Crystal Palace?
Well, I mean, Arsenal have been there since I think 1913 because we had our centenary, but not many. I don't think. I mean, you're probably going to say what the big six. So Tottenham. Put them in the big six. Wow, what have I done? Tottenham, Liverpool, United. I mean, City. When did they come back up again and get all the money? That's been
2001.
okay. So they've been up there. So it's probably I'm
Yeah.
going to say what they maybe 8 or 9 have been there.
No, it's 9. You actually got it right. The only 2 outside the ones that never been relegated from the Premiership are Man City and West Ham. And West Ham have got 1 more season on us. So
Wow.
after the end of this season, we'll remove Man City from that list. So we'll be up a slot. So when they get relegated.
It's crazy because like just from doing this now for like the 4 or 5 episodes or what have you, kind of looking at teams that you see in the lower leagues that you're like, wow, I remember when they were up in the top division. I'm hopefully getting a guy on that's an Oldham fan that will be coming on soon. I remember them being in the top flight when I was a lad, and they're now down in not even in the professional. I think they're in whatever what was the conference, Nationwide North or whatever it is. But you look down those
Yeah.
leagues and you're like, wow, it doesn't take long to fall, and then if you're not lucky and get back up again, that can be it. So
Yeah.
now that's all credit to Palace for coming back up. I was looking through as I said before we hit the record button, there's certain things, storylines throughout football that Palace seem to have been involved in. I always kind of look back at it as well through kind of an Arsenal lens as to why do I remember Palace. But there's some infamous moments before we get you to name your highest high. Palace were obviously involved in the Cantona moment.
Yes. Yes, of course we were.
So, for anyone who's not aware, we've got January 1995. In fact, I talked about this with Tony on the Man United episode, but United and Palace at Selhurst Park. Cantona was sent off for a challenge on Richard Shaw, and as he walked towards the tunnel, Palace fan came over and waved at him. Waved at him and maybe gave some choice words. And
Yes.
Cantona decided to launch in and do a kung fu kick. I mean, talk about not wanting. I mean, they say no PR is bad PR, but Palace was seen around the world then because it was basically we'd never seen anybody do that before.
Yeah, I think there was a slight mismatch in punishment there. The fan got banned for life, quite rightly, and Cantona got community service teaching kids how to play football. I mean, that's hardly a punishment, I think, really, at the end of it. So, but he more or less turned his back on football after that point, anyway. So that was almost the end of him. But yeah, that was an incident that does stick in the mind. I mean, the other downside was you think over the years, 9-0 loss to Liverpool was pretty bad. That was pretty dire. But then in that same season, we went and got to the FA Cup final. So you have highs and lows even within the same season when you're a Palace fan.
Well, I mean, before I get you to name your highest high, then let's just go through a couple of these things that kind of popped up when I was asking ChatGPT for Crystal Palace's kind of stories in football. I didn't know it was called this. I remember you guys coming back May 5th, 2014, 3-0 down to Liverpool with 11 minutes left on the clock. They needed the points to be going after the title, I think. And you scored 3 goals in 11 minutes, and it got referred to apparently as Cristanbul because it was to mimic Liverpool's Istanbul comeback against AC Milan. That was one of the most insane last 10 minutes of football I have ever watched.
Yeah. Well, they have. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the nature of a lot of games I think I've seen over the years.
Yeah, and it was just one of those classic mid-table team takes points off a title chasing team that we've kind of seen a number of times down the years. And talking to mid-table, I mean, let's be fair, since you've been back up, you haven't actually been pulled into too many relegation battles too often.
No, not often, no. I mean, the thing is, when you go through these periods, you don't, as a fan, you don't have this given right to feel like you're in the Premiership when you actually almost expect there's an expectation that you're going to be battling at the bottom of the league, and that was the case for years with Palace. We go up, we were the main yo-yo team for a long period between the Premiership and the Championship. But when you know you've gone down, you quite often have quite a high the following season in terms of a promotion or playoff final. And some of the biggest highs end up being those moments when you're at Wembley, because we don't get to many FA Cup finals. So our Wembley was always a championship playoff final. And that environment and that situation, as you know, when there's nothing like it as a fan being involved in that kind of final environment where you're that day, whatever happens, something major's going to happen as a result of that. You're going to win a trophy or you're going to go home thinking, well, next year, whatever. So
yeah, I mean, like you say, you kind of been up and down. So let's think about the ups then. Mentioned kind of playoff final, mentioned FA Cup finals, which actually I think so. You haven't won either of them, but you've been supporting them for both of them. Because if you said you started supporting them in 1989, like when I think back of memories of Palace, I will always remember. Actually, not I think was it 1989 FA Cup final. Or was it
1990?
Was it 1990? 89-90
Yeah.
Season, was it? And I know you lost in the final to United, and I think it went to a replay. But what still sticks out in my head is the semi-final against at Villa Park when you beat Liverpool 4-3.
That was incredible. Yeah.
Epic, absolutely epic semi-final.
Yeah, and Ian Wright had come back that game. He'd broken his leg and he'd been out for a long period, and he was just coming back. Um, and so, I mean, we just had the thing you have to realize about Palace teams, what we value is battle. You know, the players on a Palace team never give up. They go for every ball. They charge things down. Even if you watch the latest Palace team with what Glasner has got us, the press that we play on opposition is what frightens them and gets us the wins and things at the moment. And it's that Palace fans appreciate. If you're not a hard worker on a pitch, we don't want you in the team. So it's those moments, that Liverpool game, it was a never say die situation. They just kept coming back again. And it was that forceful nature of that midfield and the strikers that just made a difference on the day. But I wasn't actually there. I was in I think my brother was in hospital at the time, so I was at home watching it, and I just remember that gripping the moment at the time. So
I still remember it now. It was in the good old days when you used to have semi-final Saturday, I think it was, where both semi-finals would be back to back. And at
yeah,
neutral grounds, none of this Wembley malarkey for semi-finals.
yeah, no, it was great.
Oh gosh, we're old, Laurie. So go on then. What's been the highest high in the Crystal Palace journey for you?
It's really difficult because I think we mentioned a few of them in those finals. I think having in recent times it's been taking my son actually. So we don't live as close as I used to the Palace ground, but I've taken him and we watching one of the first games I took him to was the West Ham game last season, and quite frankly, I've never seen a Palace team demolish a side like that in a match. After 20 minutes, the West Ham players got in a huddle because they were like, "What has just gone on?" Because they were already 3-0 down against that, and it could have been 6 or 7. It was one of those games that they were just blown off the park. And I had to say to my son, this is not what you should expect for each week from a Palace team. The grinding out 0-0 draws that I've been experiencing throughout my life of watching Palace. That's what you should be used to, not these big scoring games. The next one I took him to was when we thrashed Man United. So that was his first 2 games of football. And I was like, this won't carry on.
I know exactly what you mean because Arsenal dismantled Villa when I took my eldest to the first game. And there is something about that. It's quite nervous as a dad because you're kind of like, right, especially like social media, being swayed by their friends. This is my kind of, I need to get him on board the Arsenal train now and not let any other teams come in. So you're kind of a little bit nervous because like if they get beaten, that walk away from a ground after you've lost, especially if it's an awful performance, I'm like, please don't let that be the first memory. Please don't let that be the first memory. And then when we've won, that buzz when you're all coming out the ground and all the chatter around you is, oh, what about that goal? What about that thing? Oh, that was great. This was great. And it's like, yes. And that must be exactly what you had with him coming out of that first game.
Yeah. The other moment I would say that is one of these classics you'll always remember. Do you remember we had for a season? It was an incredible signing at the time. Was Attilio Lombardo signed for Crystal Palace? Now, if you look back at pictures of the crowd at that time, he was such a cult hero. Lots of people in the crowd would wear bald wigs. So you'd see all of these fans with these skull caps on of pretending to be Attilio Lombardo in the crowd, and that was just one of those things that you remember as well over the years of those moments.
That's a really nice segue because one of the other things I wanted to kind of talk to you about was you've always been a team that has either had that one, and if you've been lucky, maybe 2 bright stars. So you had Wright and Bright. You had Andy Johnson, didn't you?
Yeah.
Great goal scorer. You've had Zaha. You've had Eze, and just I think for me, Palace have always been one of these teams that have maybe, and you can tell me off if I'm being derogatory here, but 8, 9 grafters, good solid footballers, but then you've always had maybe those two bright sparks that you also probably worry, I wonder how long we're going to keep them for because they're that good. Is that a fair summary, kind of the team?
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's starting to change a little bit now. If you look at the papers and the reports at the moment of it's always a good thing to see your players linked with moves when you're a smaller club because you're doing something right. And at the moment, you've got Eze still being linked with a move away. You've got Gahey being linked with a move away.
Yeah.
You've got Tyrick Mitchell. You've got Mateta. You've got Wharton being linked with 100 million to Man City. I'm convinced that they'll pay that kind of money for him. But that's 5 or 6 players. And now we've gone and bought the next, hopefully, Elise in this Esse guy from Millwall. So it has to be that rotation of players around it. And some people criticised us this season when we got rid of Anderson, and well, we had no choice on Elise. But Anderson was criticised. But we've gone and bought a 24-year-old in Lacroix, who I think will be a better player than Anderson. You know, when we and people will be looking and are interested in him in 2 seasons' time. I have to explain to my son that this is football. He's going, why can't we keep everybody? And I'm like, that's not going to work. You know, financially, we have to sell. We have to move on from 1 or 2 players, and that's really about how football has to work at the different levels. Arsenal, not your team, have got much more ability to hold on to those players for a career and make the right choice of when to sell them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we've ever been in a situation we've had to sell everybody, but I do remember in the early days of when the Emirates Stadium was built and Wenger was operating more on a budget, we saw a lot more of our bigger players go out. It's the only, you never have regrets in life, but that kind of post-Invincibles era when it was Henry and Bergkamp and everybody, and then everyone's there saying, oh, this team's going to dominate for the next 10 years. And then fast forward 2-3 years, stadium's been built, budget's been cut, didn't win the Champions League, and suddenly now we're just treating top 4 as a trophy rather than actual trophies because it just shifted, and that's the whole thing. You never know what's going to happen in football. Arsenal could be in a relegation battle next season, and anybody that does that old phrase of too big to go down, my brother-in-law's a Spurs fan, and he's still looking over his shoulder. The other brother-in-law's a Man United fan, and they're not much ahead of them. I mean, you look at the table. If you mentioned that United and Tottenham were next to each other in the table and asked where is that likely to be, you wouldn't have said near the bottom like they are this year.
No, even a couple of weeks ago, just saying that you were in the league, Crystal Palace were above Arsenal, Man United. Sorry, not Arsenal. Man United, Tottenham, and West Ham were all below us in the league, and Man City, who weren't that far away from us above us. You're thinking that's a really odd situation for a Premiership season.
I know. So, and do you look at the table this year and can you breathe a bit more easily? Because you're 24 games in, 30 points, 10 points away from the magical 40, but you're 12th in the league. And if we're really honest, Southampton and Ipswich just don't look like they'll be able to get themselves out of trouble, right? So the chances of any of the other 6 teams below you going on a run to go past you, you've got to feel that this is a pretty safe season where you're not going to get sucked into it.
Yeah, it's always a question. People ask if you're a medium-sized club, you want to get into Europe, and part of you does, and part of you doesn't. Okay, you look at the history of some of the teams that have managed to scrape into Europe, and the subsequent season they're in trouble with relegation on the back of it because you don't have big enough squads and capabilities to do that. However, it would be nice, right, to have a year of doing it. We haven't done that's something we in all those Premiership years we haven't achieved, and maybe it's not this year is 1 year too early, but I think we're building a squad that could get a European spot at some point. And I think this year we've just got Wharton back from injury. So he's back in the team, and he's like our metronome for a team. He's the player that just keeps the ball moving in a positive way. And having him back will free up Eze and will free up Sarr and enable Mateta to get those quick balls that will get him some more goals that will just see us safe this season. I don't think we're going to be pulled back into the trouble. Even though we did go down on 40 points. You didn't mention that.
Did you?
we did go down on 40 points. We're one of the clubs that did. So that was a terrible season when that happened.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment you are what are you? Like I said, you're 30 points, so you're 11 off City, you're in fifth.
Mm,
And you're 13 clear of Leicester. So you are closer to City and as in the Manchester version than you are to the Leicester version. So
yeah.
I think we can probably say that Palace are okay this year. And then if that comes back to bite me, well, oh well. Sorry. Okay, so that's kind of like your journey. Have you got a favorite player as you look back? By the way, it is something I haven't really done with folk in the past, and it just kind of struck me as we were talking about some of the names. I was googling it. You actually had Edgar Davids. He only played 6 times, I think, but you've had some big names. But who's kind of if there's a poster going on the bedroom wall of favorite player, who's Laurie's favorite player
I think, well, I
ever?
think ever is really tricky. I mean, Zaha, you have to look at on his day, he was probably the best player we've ever had at the club, and that includes Ian Wright as well. And even we've had Kenny Sampson and various famous players over the years. But the problem was he didn't have his day consistently enough. If he did, then he definitely wouldn't have been playing for Palace. He would have been one of the world beaters. I think actually that we're going to find out that Elise was the best player we had. I think he's going to win a Ballon d'Or. I think he's
Really?
that good. I honestly think he's that good. We just didn't have him long enough. He's left, but he's really capable. The other one that I've always loved watching, and he became our manager at one point, was Friedman. He was a very clever player. He was one of those players that would just sit in the hole and play those through balls and create those opportunities. So I used to like watching him. He didn't score as many goals as some of the others, but he also played for us during some of the hard times when we were down in the Championship, and we needed his goals to make a difference. And sometimes you value players that way in the harder times than you do when you're comfortable. And I used to live. One fact, as a kid, I lived in a few doors down from Jeff Thomas.
Oh wow.
And so, as a kid, I used to say, I know where Jeff Thomas lives. And it happens the road was called Upper Road. So you go, he lives Upper Road. And everyone would go, oh, of course, right, okay. Those are my players that stand out in time, really.
Okay, well, it's kind of approaching the end. So one thing we have to look forward to is previewing the next game, which is this Saturday. You are at home to Everton. I imagine you would much rather have played the Everton from about a month ago, rather than the David Moyes resurgent. That was we're recording on a Wednesday here, so it was the Merseyside derby last night, which seemed a pretty boring game, was fairly uneventful. Uh, Well, you are at home, so what are you thinking about that one? First off, what do you kind of think? What do you see? What do you hope for? And then I'm going to force you into a prediction.
Well, if it was away, I'd actually feel more comfortable at the moment. We're one of the strongest teams away in the Premiership at the minute. We're not losing games away. We're struggling more at home where we've got to dominate a game. But, Eze back, Wharton in the team. I'm hopeful we'll get a win out of this one, and quite comfortably. I'm hoping for.
Oh, quite comfortably. So, I mean, because it's sometimes we do see that when a team has come off the back of something huge, like the last minute equaliser against Liverpool, that adrenaline rush, getting back up for the next game is sometimes not necessarily as easy. So you think maybe a little bit of post Merseyside hangover, plus you guys being on the up at the moment. When you say quite comfortably, go on, give me a score. What's it going to be?
I think it's going to be 2 or maybe 3-0. I think.
Oh,
So that will be my bet. Mateta getting at least one of them.
oh, so not only are you giving me a score, we're going for a scorer prediction as well. No one's done that before. Okay, so it's on me. So I'm just looking at this. I mean, you guys, separated by 3 points. you've scored 28 and conceded 30, so you're a -2. They've scored 25 and also conceded 30, so they're a -5. I mean, there's almost like nothing between you guys at the moment.
Mm.
And Moyes is getting a tune out of them. Oh, Laurie, I'm going to go against you. I'm going to back Everton to get something on the road, but I think I'm going to go 2-2.
2-2. All right.
Yeah,
Okay. We'll see.
we'll see. We'll lock that in, and then on next week's episode, I'll do a little match review and see how we got on. We're doing all right at the moment. We've only had one team that we followed that have lost, so we haven't been a curse at the moment to teams. I think that was Hereford on the very first game. They went away and lost. So everything else, Shrewsbury equalised late and got a draw, and the others have won. So it's all looking good.
Yeah.
So I might be wrong and you might be right, but I really appreciate you taking some time out to come and talk all things Palace, Laurie. It's been good catching up with you again, so appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Rob. Let's speak to you again.
And if anyone else out there wants to come on, or you've got friends who are big supporters of a certain team, it doesn't matter if they've been supporting them for 5 months or 5 decades. Everybody's got highs, lows, favourite players and their origin story. Just shoot an email over to randomfandomfc@gmail.com and we'll try and get you on as soon as we can. So on that note, see you next time.